The United States Supreme Court has delivered a pivotal 6-3 decision, fundamentally changing how gun laws are evaluated nationwide. This momentous ruling is already being called one of the most significant Second Amendment cases in decades, with the potential to reshape the legal landscape for years to come. The eyes of the nation are now on the highest court, as its decision reverberates through every level of government and society. This ruling introduces a new, stringent standard for judging all gun laws, not about specific weapons, but about the method courts must use to determine constitutionality. Instead of relying on broad interpretations or balancing tests, judges must now look closely at the nation's historical traditions when deciding if a gun law is valid. This approach demands a careful examination of legal precedents and the original context of the Second Amendment, making it much harder for lawmakers to justify new restrictions. For gun owners, it first seemed like a major victory, promising greater protection for individual rights. However, as the decision filters down to lower courts, its unpredictable application has sparked confusion and frustration. Some judges have struck down long-standing regulations while others have upheld them, leading to a patchwork of rulings that leave citizens and officials uncertain about what the law actually allows. The decision forces a re-examination of laws from small towns to entire states, making the national debate over firearms even more contentious. Local governments are scrambling to review their ordinances, and state legislatures are facing mounting pressure from both gun rights advocates and those calling for stricter controls. The ripple effects are being felt in communities large and small, as everyone tries to understand what this new legal era means for public safety and personal freedom. The 6-3 split among justices highlights deep ideological divisions, mirrored in communities across the country. The passionate debates in the courtroom are echoed on the streets, in town halls, and across social media, as Americans grapple with the implications of the ruling and what it reveals about the nation's values. Rather than settling the issue, the ruling has opened a new, unpredictable chapter in the gun rights debate. Legal experts warn that the coming months and years will bring a wave of new lawsuits as both sides test the boundaries of the court's decision. The uncertainty has left many wondering how far the changes will go and what the future holds for gun regulation in America. In this video, we'll break down the court's decision, the new legal test, and its real-world impact in states like Illinois and Washington. We'll look at how lawmakers, law enforcement, and everyday citizens are responding, and what challenges they now face as they navigate this shifting legal landscape. We'll also explore the main arguments on both sides and consider what might come next for American gun law. As the nation stands at a crossroads, the conversation about rights, safety, and the Constitution is more urgent than ever. The Supreme Court's new History and Tradition test now governs all gun law challenges. This test has become a pivotal point in the ongoing debate over the Second Amendment and gun control in the United States. Under this test, a modern gun law is only constitutional if the government can show a similar regulation existed when the Second or 14th Amendments were adopted. This means that the historical context of the late 18th and mid-19th centuries is now more relevant than ever in judicial decisions. Judges must now act as historians, searching for historical parallels. No more balancing public safety against gun rights. This shift places a significant burden on the judiciary to interpret historical records accurately and apply them to contemporary issues. This is a sharp break from the old two-step process, which weighed government interests against individual rights. The previous method allowed for a more nuanced consideration of both public safety and individual freedoms. Supporters say this approach protects fundamental rights from being eroded by modern concerns. They argue that the original intent of the Constitution should be preserved, and that contemporary issues should not dilute these foundational principles. Critics argue it's unworkable, forcing judges into historical guesswork and ignoring the realities of modern firearms. They contend that this method is impractical and fails to address the complexities of today's society. With no 18th century equivalent for today's weapons, many modern regulations could be struck down, regardless of public safety needs. This raises concerns about the potential for increased gun violence and the challenges of regulating advanced weaponry. The result, a legal standard rooted in the past, but with sweeping consequences for the present. As the debate continues, the impact of this test will be closely watched by both legal experts and the general public. The History and Tradition test has dramatically upended the legal landscape for gun laws across the country. Now, Legal battles focus on whether a historical precedent exists, not on public safety data or modern concerns. Gun rights advocates use this new standard to challenge bans on popular firearms, arguing there's no tradition of banning common arms, but lower courts are split. Some demand nearly identical historical laws, while others accept broader similarities in precedent. This inconsistency creates a confusing patchwork. What's legal in one state may be a felony in another state. The Supreme Court aimed for clarity, but instead, the nation faces profound and ongoing legal uncertainty. For gun owners and lawmakers alike, the rules are shifting, and no one truly knows where they'll eventually land. The Supreme Court's ruling is already reshaping state laws in places like Illinois and Washington. In Illinois, gun rights groups are challenging bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, arguing there's no historical tradition for such restrictions. Yet, courts have upheld these bans, citing historical regulations on dangerous and unusual weapons. In Washington, a ban on magazines over 10 rounds was also upheld, with the state's highest court ruling magazines are accessories, not protected arms. Gun owners see these decisions as legal loopholes that sidestep the Supreme Court's intent. The result: frustration and confusion, as state courts interpret the new standard in dramatically different ways. Instead of resolving the issue, the Supreme Court's decision has shifted the fight to new legal battlegrounds. For many, the promise of expanded rights feels out of reach. The Supreme Court's ruling has deepened the divide between gun rights advocates and supporters of stricter regulation. Gun owners see the right to bear arms as essential for self-defense and freedom, arguing the new test restores constitutional protections. They claim bans on common firearms only disarm law-abiding citizens, not criminals. On the other side, advocates for regulation argue that the Second Amendment must be balanced with public safety, especially given the power of modern weapons. They see the history and tradition test as outdated, preventing lawmakers from addressing today's gun violence. Both sides point to history, one to defend individual rights, the other to highlight early American gun regulations. The debate is no longer just about policy, but about how we interpret the Constitution itself. The result: passionate arguments but little consensus. America's understanding of the Second Amendment has changed dramatically over time, reflecting the nation's evolving attitudes toward guns, rights, and public safety. What began as a brief line in the Bill of Rights has become one of the most debated and analyzed sentences in American legal history. For nearly 2 centuries, courts interpreted the Second Amendment as being closely tied to the maintenance of state militias, rather than as a guarantee of individual gun ownership. Early legal debates and court decisions focused on the collective right of states to defend themselves, not on personal self-defense or private gun possession. This long-standing interpretation shifted dramatically in 2008, when the Supreme Court's landmark Heller decision recognized, for the first time, an individual right to possess firearms for self-defense within the home. The ruling marked a turning point, sparking new debates and legal challenges across the country. Even after Heller, the court made it clear that this right was not unlimited. Regulations remained in place, such as bans on gun ownership by felons or the mentally ill, and restrictions on carrying dangerous and unusual weapons. Lawmakers and judges continued to wrestle with where to draw the line. For over a decade, courts across the nation tried to balance the need for public safety with the protection of individual rights, leading to a patchwork of laws and ongoing legal battles in different states and cities. Recently, the Supreme Court introduced the history and tradition test, a new standard that asks judges to look only at historical precedent when deciding if a gun law is constitutional, rather than weighing modern concerns or policy arguments. Critics argue that this approach ignores 2 centuries of social and technological change, making it harder to address today's challenges. Supporters, however, believe it stays true to the Constitution's original intent and protects fundamental freedoms. The meaning of the Second Amendment has never been fixed in stone, and today, the debate over its interpretation is more heated and complex than ever before, touching every corner of American society. Understanding this long and shifting history is essential to grasping why the current debate over gun rights and regulations remains so intense, and why the future of American gun law is still being written. The Supreme Court's decision has intensified, not ended, the national debate on guns. The history and tradition test is inconsistently applied, leaving gun owners and lawmakers in a state of confusion. Cases from Illinois and Washington are already heading back to the Supreme Court seeking clarity on what the Second Amendment protects. If the court takes up these cases, it could set a national precedent, or leave the current patchwork in place. Without a clear ruling, the legality of firearms will continue to vary by state, satisfying no one. The core question, how to balance historic rights with modern realities, remains unresolved. As legal battles continue, the future of gun rights and regulation hangs in the balance. For now, Americans are left waiting for answers from the nation's highest court.